Match this week when DC Comics killed off the Man of Steel in a bout with an underworld villain. Associate's Leslie Kane reports the superhero was laid to rest and remembered at an El Toro comic book store on Friday.
Well, what can you say? The greatest superhero ever. Gone.
I'm here with Joe Corallo.
Hi.
And hi. And, I'm glad we got a chance to talk. You recently went through Death of Superman. I think it's always fun talking with you, kind of your takes on the comics and everything that's going on. And we're going to talk Death of Superman.
Yeah, I was reading that, and then you had put up a video about Superman last week from when I did this, and I also I fell down a bit of a Superman hole. I was I had read Kryptonite Nevermore right before I read that, so I was all in on Superman, and then the Death of Superman just made me go into YouTube and pull up all the old news clippings and interviews and all of that stuff. So I was really in it.
Certainly the Man of Steel will be missed by his many friends and fans. I'll just always remember him as a strong man, yet very gentle. He was noble, strong, courageous. He was a Superman.
It was funny at the time because I had my shop at the time, and I remembered this vividly because it was one of the few and only times we had a huge line. Like, people were camped out hours before we opened to try and get their hands on this, and the media was helping. There were news stories that it was there, and I mean, it was an event.
Yeah,
and it was great. I mean, from a sales perspective, that was a happy day. But it was funny because I remember, I would say 90% of the people coming in to buy that issue really believed that he was dead. He wasn't coming back. And do you remember this at the time? There were people who really were bought into the idea that he was dead.
I was vaguely aware. I was pretty young at the time. I was young enough to be watching Lois and Clark and not really caring or understanding, but yeah, I was vaguely aware because I was a kid, but kids read comics, and I was into all of the cartoons that were just starting right around the Death of Superman or later that year. They had the video games and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was aware, but even as a kid, I didn't think Superman was dead, but
yeah.
But one of the really fascinating things about all of this that I never hear a single person talk about, which blows my mind, is the image revolution is a huge part of how this happened.
Yes.
And no one people tend to over credit in some instances the image revolution, but they set all the groundwork. Earlier in the year, or I guess the year before, because I think he technically died in January of '93, but we all knew he was going to die November. But Liefeld was doing all those TV appearances, Bloodshot, or Youngbloods rather. Sorry, Youngbloods came out in the middle of '92. Spawn, Wildcats, all that stuff was coming out. Those crazy signings at Golden Apple Comics and. The Liefeld jeans commercial, all that stuff prepped the news to take this seriously and cover it, because the news was already covering all these other things. I mean, you had Todd McFarlane on the Home Shopping Network hawking, the Spawn deluxe box set. They prepped the world for the Death of Superman. It was such lightning in a bottle, because you had Image setting the groundwork for DC, and then Lois and Clark telling DC, you can't get them to get married because we want to do that first. So Death of Superman wasn't even going to happen that year. They scrapped it last minute and did this. So this is the key to understanding the Death of Superman is it truly was lightning in a bottle and is literally impossible to replicate.
In the 1990s, there are few real-life heroes. A lot of times in movies and TV, we tend to focus on heroes like Rocky or Indiana Jones. In an upcoming issue of a comic book, one great hero, Superman, will be killed off. This has a special connection to people in the greater Cleveland area. The creator of Superman was from Cleveland. We're here at the 1992 Mid-Ohio Con Comic Book Convention to talk to some artists and industry insiders to get their opinions.
No, there was a lot that happened in that time span that I think there's a lot of almost fluke elements. And you also had Image getting to the market faster because of Malibu than they normally would have, because they use that distribution chain to kind of speed things up. So they never really cooled down as creators. They did do all those news interviews that you talked about. John Byrne had left a couple of years earlier. So, and Superman was kind of rudderless to some extent. And so you just had a bunch of kind of dominoes fall all within the course of about 12 months or so.
But for a superhero able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, surely he won't let death be his final chapter.
It is fascinating that you had the Lois and Clark situation coming out, which I don't think a lot of people realize that, and I may be wrong about this, but I think this is one of the cases where the show was really dictating a lot of things to the comic, which I don't know happened very much before that.
I don't think it did. I'm not entirely sure why it did to that extent, but that's how they seem to want it. And people also seem to forget, too, that the Superboy TV show was wrapping up right before Lois and Clark, because that was still on the air in 92.
Right.
So Superman, even as Superboy, it's still on TV. It's cooled down. I mean, people weren't really that into the show by then. It was wrapping up, but Hollywood was still all ready to go. It's like, all right, Superboy's done. Let's go right to Lois and Clark, and let's just keep the train going. And it's interesting that for that show, they seem to want to put more in. I don't know. I guess Lois and Clark was also the kind of show that seemed to really be going after an entirely different audience than the comic, which makes it even more perplexing.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and behind the scenes, I think you transitioned from Byrne, who was kind of, for what I understand, was running everything, and then you had a bunch of people trying to get their ideas to all work together, and then you had that outside influence of the TV show, and it's just, and then of course the Image going on, the revolution going on, a lot of attention being put there, both positive and negative. I think there's pressure within DC to do something to kind of get their own news. And it is. I don't know. Could this ever be replicated? I think it'd be hard for this situation to replicate.
Yeah, because it's hard to replicate a situation that was never supposed to happen in the first place.
Yeah,
because they genuinely didn't think people were going to care. And every interview and documentary they've done about this, it's always done from a mindset of, we can't believe people really stuck to this, like that this one stuck. And it's like, it stuck because the Image revolution. If that had not happened, you didn't already have these people who were all looking for the next key issue to buy, you wouldn't have had this. And then, and it's like, on top of all of that, you had, again, like you were saying, like this idea of it's a bit rudderless, trying to coordinate, because you also you had too many Superman books. I mean, you don't have that many, today, or really since. There really have been very few instances since then, once they started folding in books, where you had 4 ongoing monthly Superman titles.
Yep.
And also, to put this in perspective for people, it took until I think it was 1971 for Superman, the solo Superman book, to become a monthly. It wasn't a monthly until then.
That's right.
So you have DC getting 2 monthly Superman books in a way in the 70s, and then just a little over about 20 years later, now there's 4. It's a lot.
Roger Stern, a writer for the Superman comic book, told us how the storyline of Superman's death got started.
the main reason that Superman is dying is that in our story conferences we came up with a story that was too powerful not to do. Dan Jurgens originally came up with the idea of doing a Death of Superman story, and he also wanted to do a new major physical threat for Superman to fight. That threat became Doomsday, and it became part of the Death of Superman story. It was purely a creative concept. It wasn't, marketing didn't come to us and say we'll sell 1 million copies if we kill him off, and then just bring him back the next week. We're not going to do that. The creative people came up with this. That's been the strength, I think, of the Superman titles since John Byrne relaunched them in '86, is that they've been creator-driven. The writers and the artists getting together with the editor and coming up with strong, powerful stories.
After Byrne left, the four are selling around 150,000 odd copies. And that was considered a bit of a disappointment because the competition and more extreme stories are selling a lot more. And like you said, they'd done all this work to get to this wedding, and then they were told they couldn't do it. So then in kind of the 11th hour, they threw this story out. And I think this story goes that Ordway was convinced they would never go for it. It was almost like a joke being thrown out of, hey, why don't we kill Superman? But then they greenlit it and fast-tracked it and just shot it out there.
Yeah, because there really wasn't any build-up to Doomsday. It was just this character that they kind of filled in the gaps later on.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just like, oh, there's this big menace that broke out from like under the earth.
Yeah.
and we'll figure it out later, it's interesting that they thought that was the way to go when, the reign of the Supermen is where they tie back in, was it Hank Henshaw and Eradicator?
Right. Yeah. More of
that they didn't think to use an already established villain then and just made something else new. And then we're like, oh, and now we'll bring these back.
Well, I mean, from what I understand, the design of Doomsday was really based on them trying to give an Image feel to the comic. They were copying a lot of how Image villains and characters looked. And I think there's even a mandate went out to make it look like an Image villain. And that's kind of how we got the design of Doomsday as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, and then we get a bit of that later where, Superman's basically the Punisher for a couple of issues, in the black suit with guns and all of that. And he just feels really out of character.
Yeah, it's so you recently read through the omnibus.
Yep.
And how is that? How is the omnibus?
Here's the thing. The omnibus, I think it's also probably out of print, but they come in and out of print. So like you got to kind of keep an eye on it. But the omnibus is so close to being great. The biggest problem is for no reason, it is missing the Supergirl Team Luthor one shot, which
key to the story.
Yeah, it's a key part of the story. If you're reading the omnibus, at some point Lex Luthor just has a broken leg and you have no idea why.
Yeah, it's so weird when you're putting this stuff together. Supergirl and Team Luthor. It was a one shot. I'm just like, this is Roger Stern. There's actually no reason why this should have been ignored. You had people on it who knew what they were doing. It wasn't written outside of the editorial, and Mike Carlin was still doing the editing for it.
Yeah.
So I haven't, like, do you think that there was some intentional reason they did this, or was it just they forgot? Or
I feel like they might have just forgotten or thought, oh, it's not that important. But like, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, there was another hardcover they did of this years before the latest omnibus, where it was everything, but they left out Supergirl Team Luthor, and they also left out Superman Legacy #1.
Yeah.
Which is even more baffling. It's just,
I don't get it.
I truly do not understand the mapping of some of these omnibuses, and I'm going to shout out to Omar at Near Mint Condition. He has a YouTube show where he talks about this, and he's also always frustrated with the bizarre mapping that they do for some of these books.
So we've talked about this. I think it's very weird to me that you have a collection, you have an omnibus, and then you put the issues, you stick to how the floppies were printed as opposed to pulling the pages and putting them in a coherent order for the reading. I mean, the omnibus is not a collector's edition where you're trying to preserve how the floppies were. It's a different beast. I've never met a customer or a reader who wanted the issues done this way. But every time I've talked to the companies, they tell me that no, this is how it should be. This is how customers want the issues to be laid out. They want the issues to be preserved in this way for some reason. And what do you make of that?
It doesn't make any sense. And a lot of that too also goes back to this idea of, well, when they reprint some of these omnibuses, like the ones that are just the reprints of the Masterworks, like from Marvel, they keep all the letters columns and things like that. But then when they do these other omnibuses, like the Daredevil Frank Miller omnibus, there's no letters columns. Or when they do, the Evolutionary War omnibus, it's all of those annuals, but they chop the High Evolutionary backup story from all of them and then put them all in the end, which is just weird. And it reads it was such a slog to finish that omnibus because they were never meant to be read together like that. And it shows. It's this like long meandering story of the High Evolutionary and how he comes to be that like was meant to be taken in small chunks. And then they're like, nah, you just have to have all of it at once. And I don't get why they do that or like have things that aren't necessarily in the correct reading order. That Evolutionary War omnibus, oof.
Yeah.
I just hated how that was mapped. I wish they kept all the backup stories with the issue. It just doesn't work when you have to read the High Evolutionary's like backstory in one go like that. But yeah, I get it's not always easy. I feel like especially older DC comics, it becomes difficult because they were anthologies for so much like longer of their time. And then it's like, do you do a Detective Comics like collection where you also have like the Green Arrow backups, or do you not do that? Do you just collect things this way? And it's like, I get that, but just put the Supergirl Team Luthor one shot in a Death and Return of Superman omnibus. Jeez.
It feels like people undervalue what the omnibus brings, and then it's like, well, it's not going to be that much money, so we don't need to spend that much time on it. But I think increasingly, I think people are going to want to read comics this way.
Yeah.
So you maybe get in practice.
Yeah, I love it. It's probably one of my preferred ways of reading comics at this point. I just love it.
Yeah, it's going to. I mean, it fits with the whole idea of binging things and everything else. And this storyline itself, I think, really lends itself to the Death of Superman storyline. It's better reading in one go as opposed to reading monthly was actually fairly painful, as I recall.
Yeah, it's tough, especially it's hard to keep track of these kind of events when you're like even as I'm reading it. It's difficult to keep in mind, like, wait, which one's the first one from the month? And like, what was it Roger Stern leading? Was it Dan Jurgens? What's going on? Like you lose sight of that even as you're reading it in the omnibus. So picking it up like every week, that's a nightmare.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the story didn't necessarily, the story flowed like it was done in a hurry. I mean, the aftermath and the kind of the rise of the Superman and everything else felt a little bit more planned out, but the actual death was very, very quick, very sudden. And maybe that contributed to the kind of the crowd reaction, because it did seem to take people by surprise, and they were curious and they tuned in. And like you mentioned before, all the media attention really brought them. And it seemed like the haste maybe almost played in their favor, but reading it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, and also someone who doesn't tend to get proper credit for this is Martha Thomas's, who was the PR person at DC at the time, and helped secure a lot of that news footage, getting the word out there to the media as this was going on. So a lot of how it got to be as popular as it did is thanks to her. So it's something to keep in mind. And also, like you were saying, like it almost feels like in the actual Death of Superman story, it's somehow like a decompressed slugfest.
Yeah, it's a fight.
Yeah, because it's like you'll have a whole issue where it's just like, oh, this one house in suburbia for some reason is the only one that's affected by Doomsday, like flying through it and breaking stuff up, and like there's no neighbors or anything. That was such like a weird, like the framing of it didn't seem to work. Like it's like, are there no neighbors? Is there no one? Like it looked like a normal neighborhood in like a suburban setting where you would have people kind of close by.
Yeah.
But like even if the houses were really spread out, like what's happening? But yeah, it's interesting. It also was so popular because it was at a time where if you weren't paying attention to the storyline of Superman, if you're just picking it up again, you're like, what the hell's going on? Supergirl's a protoplasmic entity, and Lex Luthor is Lex Luthor's own son. That's a fake because he's a clone. And like all these
weird fast.
Yeah, it got really weird really fast. Which again, I want to use this as an opportunity to criticize Crisis. Because Superman before Crisis was never nearly as confusing as this, and it got this confusing in like 6-7 years. Like,
yeah, it felt like you had. I mean, of course, he had Byrne come in and do his bit, and it felt like he had a plan. But maybe that plan, and this is me just guessing, it didn't feel like that plan was maybe shared with many people, and it kind of started this pattern with a lot of characters where when sales start to dip or there's a moment in time where creative team leads, there's almost this need to kind of take a hard right turn and just throw something new on the table. But that happens enough times and it gets really, really convoluted. I'm with you. The Superman pre-Crisis was not hard to figure out. I always felt like they're solving a problem that really didn't need to be solved.
Yeah, it's really not hard to figure out. We can argue sales numbers. We can argue
Sure.
It wasn't exciting people, but it was easy to figure out. Like you could pick up a Superman comic and have a vague idea of what was going on. If you picked it up during, like, it's shocking that people picked it up and kept reading after that because it's so baffling compared to so many other points in Superman's history.
No, it really was. And I think there was the speculator market. I think a lot of the people picking up that comic were thinking they were buying college for their future children, and they weren't reading it, which was helpful because a lot of the comics made no sense. But
and you were discouraged with the polybag to even try to read it.
We just had a line that just was about 200 people went around the corner, and it's just been nonstop busyness for about 3 days. Like when the Cabbage Patch dolls came out, women screaming, saying, "Oh, I gotta have that," because somebody gave up their issue. And women just throwing things and everything. It was incredible. I wanted to run out of there and just kind of duck my head and stuff. Like
that was one of the few issues where I had to put a limit of how many copies somebody could buy, because there were people wanting to come in and just buy like 500 copies of this comic, and it still remains nuts. And I think the media attention that came and everything else, it seemed to, like you mentioned, it seemed to take the company really by surprise because they were planning on resurrecting him pretty quickly.
Yeah, and what was it? I've heard other stories about like in New York shops, like you'd have like Wall Street types who would like come into stores with like a whole empty suitcase to take as many Death of Supermans as they could. I have a friend. He has since passed away, but he used to run Collector's Kingdom here on Long Island, and he had a story about being like I think he was about 26 when he took over the store, something like that. He was a young guy. And he took over right around Death of Superman. So many of the other stores in the area under-ordered because, to them, and I think people forget this was like the initial retail reaction. It was like, oh, who cares? They're killing Superman again. Whatever. We'll buy maybe a little extra, but nothing crazy.
Yep.
And he took that gamble. And like he over-ordered in a way that only someone who just opened a shop would.
Yes.
and thinking like, oh, I know it's gonna this is gonna be big, and it's a gamble that ended up paying off. And he, ended up building relationships with a lot of other stores in the area because they were coming to him to get, additional copies as they were running out.
It was true. I mean, and that was me. My shop, I think I'm going to say 90. It was either 90 or 91. So I was early too. And I over-ordered out of stupidity, but it turned out to be a good thing. And I think it also taught a lot of retailers the worst lesson. I think some of what happened in 93 and 94, where people were dramatically over-ordering like Brigade and comics like that.
Yeah.
And being stuck with them was because they felt they missed out on Superman. So there's this like, oh, the collector's market is here. We need to not let that happen to us again. I think it created a ripple effect that would hurt a lot of stores in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. You had that. And then, there was also, there were so many other weird things too. Like a comics professional I know told me that when they were a kid, like they were pretty young at the time, their parents got them the like trade paperback of the Death of Superman off of like QVC because they did the whole thing where it's like, oh, this is gonna blow up in value and this and that, and getting parents to buy that. And I think people also forget too that even for the trade, the Death of Superman trade is one of the highest selling trades that DC's ever put out too.
Oh yeah.
By like a mile,
I think I think Watchmen beats it in a couple of the Dark Knights, but it's in that top 10. I think it's still in the top 10 for them.
Oh yeah.
And it did really well. I remember also months later when Superman returns and he's brought back to life, and DC's trying to push this up as the return of the real Superman. And I remember customers coming in the shop with their bag copies of Death of Superman wanting a refund because they got cheated that he wasn't actually dead, and they thought this would blow up the collector's value. There's a lot of funny bits of kind of people behavior that came out of this storyline.
Yeah, and I also really encourage people to go on YouTube and look up. There's so many like local news clips, bizarre news clips. There's one news clip about the Death of Superman where like they got someone to like act like they were Lois Lane or something like that, like grieving Superman. Like just ridiculous stuff like that. There's
I think I remember him best as a friend because that's how I knew him. Not as the hero, but as someone who I fought with.
It was such a weird stunt time. It was very peak early 90s and everything that was going on. But I wanted to ask you this because I'm curious if you know the answer to this because I've heard it referenced a few times, and it checks out with a later part of the story, which was at the time, kind of right as this issue was getting planned and thrown out, Neil Gaiman was doing a limited series for Superman where he died as kind of an Elseworlds or non-mainstream Superman, and they wound up canceling that project. It was Neil Gaiman and Matt Wagner, and this caused a bit of a rift that DC had to repair, and I guess did some benefit to Gaiman in later here. But have you heard anything about this other project that got killed like at the same time?
I've only heard basically what you said, but I have heard it that was something that was going on. And Gaiman was at a really good point with DC when that was happening too. I mean, Sandman was now like, it took a little over a year, but Sandman had really carved a niche out for itself. And this was right around when I think this was before or right as Vertigo was starting.
Yeah, right. It was early times, but he was coming out the gate very hot, and it was. I think Vertigo and what he was doing was seen as his antidote to people who were tired of kind of the over-the-top, the extreme era of comics and superheroes. You had Vertigo getting a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And then they cancel this book. And as the story goes, the plan, at least for when they were going to bring Superman back, or maybe somewhere during this storyline, they were going to bring the Death character that Gaiman had created for Sandman and have her show up as part of this book. And in part, at least the rumor goes, and part of how Gaiman was treated and how the book was canceled, he put his foot down and refused to have the character show up. But I don't know if this is true or not. I've long wanted to confirm or deny that story. But
yeah, I mean the way his contract works, though, he has full control over who can use those characters.
Yeah.
Because there was that whole kerfuffle maybe like 2 years ago with like Doctor. Oh, what was it? It was they were going to be in a Suicide Squad issue, and it was Doctor Endless.
Yep.
And it was this character who was like an amalgamation, and because no one notified Neil, he put his foot down and stopped them from doing that. So they ended up scrapping all this stuff. So yeah, like there have been instances over the years where like they've wanted to use characters like Death in different situations, but they need Neil's permission for that.
It was a different time. You wouldn't. I mean, that kind of control, I don't believe exists today.
No, but one interesting tidbit that I don't think a lot of people know is I mean, people know that, for example, Wheezy leans more left and Dan Jurgens is a more conservative person. And if you're reading it carefully, Wheezy handles the Clintons in a much more generous way than Jurgens.
Oh yeah,
and it comes, like if it's not pointed out to you, I can see how you miss it. But like Wheezy's issue in Funeral for a Friend is it's this like, touching, like like the Clintons go out there and Hillary, and they're giving a speech in memory of Superman. And then, right when Reign of the Supermen starts happening, Dan Jurgens is just like, Bill Clinton's a dummy and just takes a communication device from, Cyborg Superman, who's clearly the villain, and takes pictures shaking his hand and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, no, there was. I mean, people often forget about the kind of the use of the presidents back then, but I remember this very well. Like it was jarring because you got a kind of statesman Clinton in one issue and then buffoon Clinton in the next. It was very different handling. I'm sure in the omnibus it sticks out even more.
Oh yeah, it does when you're reading it that fast.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny to see all that. I mean, it's a time capsule comic, though, isn't it? I mean, like we talked about, so many things coming together to create what we got here, and I mean, everything, including the resurrection, including kind of the 90s almost. I mean, when he was originally introduced, it was like the Poochie Superboy, and then I don't know if that's man. I'm going to get some hate over that one, but it was like all the 90s kind of cool tropes were all in Superboy, and the Eradicators got the big sunglass. I mean, it was very. I mean, in many ways, I think John Irons was Steel was probably the most unique of the.
Yeah, he at least got a movie.
True.
And but yeah, that's Superboy. I'm pretty sure, I can't confirm this, but the two belts look that Superboy had, because why have one belt when you can have two?
Well, sure.
Anyone who's a big fan of The Room, Tommy Wiseau wears two belts. Coincidence?
Oh no.
But yeah, you had the Superboy who's just like, I'm wearing sunglasses and I'm going to be really inappropriate sexually with Tanya, and even though I'm technically like a couple months old.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about how much I want to get with Michelle Pfeiffer, because at like 2 months old, I've seen Michelle Pfeiffer movies.
Yeah. And very horny all the time.
Yeah, and they make it a point to say he doesn't have any of Superman's memories, and they don't work into the plot this idea of like, oh, we found another teenager that we were able to replicate his memories, so he has something. Like no explanation. It's just like he should know nothing. He should be like a replicant in Blade Runner.
Right.
And but instead he's Poochie the talking dog.
Yeah, it was a funny hand. Obviously, the character would grow into somebody that I think was a lot of fans really like. But those early issues are painful. You might have good memories of them. It's one of those things. Like I remember, it's like, oh, it wasn't that bad. And then I think about 5 years ago, I went back and read some of these issues, and it's like, oh, this is painful.
I mean, overall, Funeral for a Friend is probably some of the best stuff, especially Wheezy's like handling of the memorial and the Kent's finding out, and all that stuff's really good. All of that could have been 4 issues instead of 8.
For sure. Yeah.
And Reign of the Supermen also could have been about half as long. This is part of the problem of having 4 ongoing Superman books. You didn't need it.
Right.
Death and Return of Superman could have been half as long and would have been possibly more enjoyable to be that short. Because there's also just a lot of really horrible things happen. Like they what's it Coast City or Coastal City, I'm blanking. They just wipe it out and murder everyone.
Yeah.
And they don't really do anything to bring anyone back, but which kind of, I feel like it wasn't intentional, but when you're binge reading it, you're just like, we're all really happy one guy came back when probably 7 million people were murdered.
Oh, at least.
Yeah. So it kind of like, it undercuts the story in a way that I don't think anyone intended.
Yeah.
But boy, does it undercut the story.
It's strange. I mean, because I still have fond memories of this whole event and everything else, and not just because of the money it brought in, but it's a guilty 90s pleasure in a lot of ways. But it did. There's a lot of moments in there, like you said. I mean, they probably I'm trying to think of if No Man's Land had a bigger tragedy than in this comic. I mean, you tore through a small town. You took pains to show human cost with their fight. You blew up Coast City. You had a lot of destruction to the DC universe in this comic that kind of, like you said, it's almost swept under the rug a little bit for some kind of feel-good moments of Superman coming back. But has there been a bigger catastrophe that stuck? Because the funny thing about that is this stuff also stuck for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's one of the biggest catastrophes to happen when Superman comes back, which is just so weird. And then there's also, of course, the random old sad lady drowns dogs part.
God.
And then one of the dogs is saved by Bibbo, and then he wants to name it Krypton, but they can't do 7 letters, so he's Crypto.
Mm-hmm.
It's just every part of that is just mind-boggling.
I mean, yeah, there's some dark storytelling in this. Come to think, I mean, all across the board, it's you think about this as kind of a fluffy. I mean, almost I've heard described as a Michael Bay moment in comics, and maybe that's not the worst description in the world, but it's like there's some dark stuff in this.
It's so dark. It's pretty ridiculous, but yeah, I don't.
So you read through all of it. Are you? I mean, so what's your? I mean, all this stuff aside, like, how do you rate it? Is it one of the best stories? Is it garbage that should never be looked at again? Like, where do you put this? Where do you put the Death of Superman?
I think I feel like it's one of the better ways to understand what was happening in early 90s comics.
Yeah.
I think it's because and this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's like because it's so reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of the stuff before that, it's like it doesn't really tell you what's happening in 90s comics. You know, like David Michelini and like Todd McFarlane on Amazing Spider-Man. I love that stuff. It's not a reaction to anything necessarily in the same way as like Death of Superman is a reaction to, oh my God, Image is happening, and oh my God, no one cares about Superman, but we got a TV show and it's weird and we got to do something.
Yeah.
And scrambling everything. So this is more of a wonderful piece of comics history. And I think it's just this kind of thing, quality aside, that everyone should read and know.
I'm with you. I think it's probably. I mean, would you go as far as say? I think I would. This is the 90s bottled into a comic.
Oh, by far. It's hard to think of something in mainstream comics that does it better than this, and by does it better, I mean is so unironic in its approach. And I mean, there are the elements of I think it was mostly Wheezy poking fun at the marketing, where there's the scene with the guy who's selling the shirts and Superman shirts, and there's a little bit of that sprinkled in. But like beyond that, I think the idea of handling a bloated line and just like chugging ahead.
Yeah.
All of that is so ingrained and encapsulated in something that you could binge read, and is done in a way that's readable in a way that I don't think a lot of those other events like the Clone Saga are.
Yeah, well, and I think it sums up the 90s very well just reading the comic. And I think the more you look into the backstory, it becomes even more kind of the story of the 90s of everything we talked about, what you brought up around the show. But also it's just, you got to think this is one of the top selling comics. I think The Death of Superman sold 6 million plus copies.
Something like that, yeah. And again, and the trade is one of the highest selling trades, you know?
And the whole thing was conceived in like a week.
Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing when you think about it. And there are also other interviews and things like that I think everyone else should look up too. There's this great, I think it's about 7 minutes. This interview from like 92. It might have been like December 92 or something at this like Ohio Con, and they're interviewing Roger Stern, Jim Shooter, a store owner, a fan, and John Byrne, and they're all talking about the Death of Superman and what that means. And Roger Stern's like towing the corporate line. Like, well, who knows what's gonna happen? It's Superman, lots of like it's the answer you expect. Jim Shooter tries to take credit for it because of killing Phoenix.
Yeah.
He's just like, well, we laid the groundwork at Marvel when we killed Phoenix, and even though there's more media attention to this, I don't think that could have ever happened if I didn't do that, that kind of stuff.
Well, the death of Phoenix came about because of a story point, actually. We started off to have her become a supervillain, which had never been done before. A hero becomes a bad guy. I mean, I felt that if it evoked such passions with the people in the office, imagine how the readers would feel about it, how they would react to it. And sure enough, they did. I mean, it has become one of the seminal events in modern comics. And it doesn't get the media play that the Death of Superman does, because let's face it, Superman's been around for since '38, and it's in the dictionary. I mean, it's Americana, where Phoenix was known to comic book readers, but not so much to the general populace.
And then John Byrne, his reaction, he's just got this smug grin on his face, and he's just looking at the guy like, you must be the biggest idiot on the planet. Like, that's just, he's just looking at him and like shaking his head, and he's just like, you know what? I killed Superman. I just brought him back in one issue. Like,
everybody was kind of their peak selves during this entire thing, come to think of it.
Well, are they killing off the character? I killed him once. I just happened to bring him back to life in the same issue. It's just to sell comic books. I mean, I can't believe fans are even noticing it. I mean, how many times has Spider-Man died? How many times has everybody died? It's just a ploy to sell comics. We have a saying in comics: nobody dies forever. Nobody stays dead. And Superman is the second most successfully merchandised character in the world, right after Mickey Mouse. He's not going to stay dead.
So, of all this, having read through the whole omnibus, who would you flag as the MVP of the whole? Like, who's the writer, artist? Who's the person that helped make it all work for you?
Oh, geez. I mean, I think probably the writer with the most heart, I thought, was Wheezy. I think Steele as a character, encapsulating that like spirit of Superman. I mean, some of that stuff with like the bunny gangster or whatever, that was weird, but the overall heart of the character, how she handled, the Kents and Lois and all of them in the funeral for a friend part, all of that I think was so core to actually making it a powerful piece at points, because there are a few moments in that story that really, they hit hard.
Yeah.
You feel that Wheezy's taking this to that next level, and I think Dan Jurgens, just the way he did Hank Henshaw, he really, I think his art and storytelling in it, he creates this really dark, dreadful character, and he gets the mood right.
Mhm.
And you genuinely are intimidated by the threats he's throwing at a time where we've already killed Superman. Like,
Right. Yeah.
you already had Hank Henshaw as Cyborg Superman is a more threatening villain than Doomsday.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Doomsday is kind of this unstoppable brawler type character, but Henshaw felt evil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
It's benefited me financially and really sparked a lot of interest in the character. They're following this up with an 8-part funeral for a friend story dealing with the aftermath and people adjusting to the death of Superman. And then word is, or rumor has it, that he'll be back in some form or fashion come March. If they do it and are able to maintain some dignity and the interest is generated and carries on through with what they do with the books and character after that, I think it'll be worth it. If it's just a cheap gimmick to sell a lot of comics, it saddens me.
It's a funny comic. It is one I recommend to people. Like you said, I think it's this perfect time capsule book. I'm now getting excited. You and I will have to come back and do this for what's the time capsule book for the 80s and the 70s? And
oh, geez. I'm trying to think. That's tough because
it is a tough. We all won't put.
I can figure it out. It starts turning into is it Craven's Last Hunt for the 80s? That it might be.
That's a good solid contender, I think. I'm
just off the cuff, but
it's somewhere. I mean, I don't know. We'll go to. We should come back on and do this, but I think
we should. But the 2000s is Civil War. We should.
No doubt about it. Yeah, and I think the 80s, you can make an argument that it's somewhere between Secret Wars and Craven's Last Hunt, which very, very different stylistically, but
they're both Mike Zeck, so
yeah, doesn't hurt. All in all, it's a pretty. I'm glad you went through this and we got to talk about it. I don't know. Is there anything you missed?
Oh, the 70s is Death of Gwen Stacy, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, probably so.
Yeah.
So it's weird. Marvel tends to run these things, but this was the 90s. It's often all about kind of what was going on with the X-Men or the Image revolution, but Death of Superman was kind of the comics moment.
This tugged at people's heartstrings, hearing about it, and it affected people in different ways. You had the collector's market. You had people who were kids reading this, and now they had been checked out, so they didn't know that John Byrne killed Superman for an issue. To them, this was the first time they heard of Superman dying.
Right.
So you had this sort of reaction that you were never going to get from new properties. It doesn't matter how popular, Youngbloods, Spawn, and Wildcats were at the time. These were brand new properties. That wasn't going to get you some teary-eyed elderly man because they were going to kill Spawn.
Well, sure, and it was interesting to note because I think there were comic fans who were coming in here who'd seen Jean Grey come back, and death was more of a revolving door, not as much as today, but I think there's still that perception. And then you had all these non-comic fans coming in who never really heard of Gwen Stacy, or it wasn't really anything on their radar, and it was real. This was all very, very real to them, very emotional to them. And it was like the end of an era. I mean, I'll put in some little news clips in this video because they're funny to watch. of people like, this is the end. This is the end of Superman. It's the end of an American legacy. There were comments about, this is our changing country. You know, damn Clintons, they've killed Superman. I mean, literally stuff like that is crazy.
It's crazy you had that, and then it's also crazy that you had a lot of people who are also reacting in a very like, this just isn't the way to, you know, increase sales, and I hate the cynicism, and and you know, and people reacting that way, and just having all of the, you know, like, you know, retailers who are kind of like, I can't complain because of the sales, but this is stupid. Like, you know?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That was me. I remember that was me. I'm like, this is pretty terrible. The bagged and the bloody Superman crest and everything else. But I mean, you know, I was called by a neighboring shop who's like, hey, you're messing up the parking lot because there's a ton of people waiting outside your shop. And it was like at least 2 hours before opening. And I'm thinking this entire thing is stupid, but I'm about to have a really good day. So I mean, it was definitely a lot of emotions for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when you think of '90s paraphernalia, the two things that come up the most are, you know, like Venom on like anything, and the bloody black Superman sort of logo on a T-shirt, or, you know, like that's what, you know, I think those are such iconic pieces of imagery from '90s comics.
Well, sure, and I mean, I'd be willing to bet that the majority, I mean, any comic collector that was collecting comics in the '90s has this issue somewhere in a long box somewhere. Like,
oh yeah, you know, and not a month goes by where a store doesn't get someone to this day calling or walking in with like, I got a polybag Death of Superman, and I'm wondering how much I can get for it.
Yep.
You know, and I feel like usually the answer is like, well, if you have the return polybag too, and then maybe $10, maybe.
Yeah.
You know,
no, it's not sending kids to college. That's for sure.
no, it's sending kids to like, I don't know. I guess $10 gets you like a coffee and a pastry at a Starbucks.
Yeah, you could get maybe you know, one of the cheaper ones, or it gets you some you know, Fortnite DLC. So
yeah, or it can get you 2 chapters of Ten of Swords.
Yeah. Oh, not including tax.
No.
Ouch. On that note, oh, that brings us all down.
Oh yeah. Oh God.
Your Death of Superman purchase in the '90s can get you 2 chapters of Ten of Swords. There you have it. Well, anything. I want to really thank you for coming on and chatting with me about this. I don't know. I always have a great time talking to you. So
no, this is great.
we have to do more stuff. Like, we'd have the most sarcastic best show. I think that's.
I think we would, and that show too will send none of your kids to college.
That is true. Yeah, I'll make all the pennies off of this YouTube money. It's perfect. But anyway, well, thank you very much, and we'll have to hit the 80s.
Yes, let's do that.
All right, we'll do it.
Excellent.
And most comic book stores in Orange County are already sold out of Superman's 75th edition. A second printing is due out next week.